Of course, this is a fascinating and speculative topic that gets to the heart of cultural and theological differences within the global Catholic Church. The central idea is that when Americans imagine the first U.S. Pope, they often picture an American-style leader applied to the papacy, which misunderstands both the nature of the papacy and how a U.S.-born pope would likely be perceived by the rest of the world. Here's a breakdown of what Americans might not get. 1. He wouldn't be a CEO pope. Americans, living in the world's leading economic and military power, often expect leaders to be efficient, managerial, and decisive, like a corporate CEO or a powerful president. American expectation: a U.S. Pope would fix the Vatican's bureaucracy, the Curia, run the church like a modern organization, and issue clear, top-down directives. The reality: the papacy is not a presidency. Its power is spiritual and pastoral, not just administrative. A pope must be a unifying figure for a global flock of 1.3 billion people, most of whom live in the global south. His primary role is that of a shepherd, not a CEO. A managerial approach would be seen as overly pragmatic and lacking in spiritual fatherhood. 2. His American identity would be a liability, not an asset. Americans might see a U.S. Pope as a point of national pride, representing American values of freedom, democracy, and innovation on the global stage. The global perception, to much of the world, especially in Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia, the United States is associated with secularism, consumerism, military intervention, and the abuse of power. The Americanism that a U.S. Pope would embody is precisely what many in the Church see as a threat to Christian culture. The Vatican's fear: the Vatican has historically been wary of Americanism, the idea that the Church should adapt to modern liberal democratic ideals, emphasizing individual conscience to a degree that might challenge Church authority. A U.S. Pope would constantly be suspected of this tendency. 3. He would be incredibly isolated from American political tribes. Americans often project the domestic political battles onto the Church. Many might hope a U.S. Pope would champion their side. The liberal hope that he'd reform church teaching on abortion, female priests, or homosexuality. The conservative hope that he'd be a culture warrior, decisively condemning liberal dissent and aligning the Church with conservative political causes. The reality: a U.S. Pope would have to transcend American politics entirely. To have any moral authority globally, he could not be seen as a pawn of the American left or right. His critiques of consumerism and war would infuriate the right. His defense of core doctrine on life and family would disappoint the left. He would satisfy almost no one in his home country. 4. His theology would be shaped by the other America. The most likely candidate for a future U.S. Pope would not be from the ideological battles of the Northeast or the Bible Belt. He would most likely come from a cultural background that resonates with the future of the Church. The most likely profile: a Hispanic cardinal from a border state like Texas or California. Think of a figure like the late Cardinal Francis George or a future version of Archbishop Jose Gomez. Why this matters: his formation would be in ministry to immigrants, in a culture that blends the traditional, Latin American, with the modern, American. This experience is far more relevant to the global Church's reality than the experience of a cardinal from Boston or New York. His American identity would be complex, multicultural, and not the default one many Americans imagine. 5. His greatest challenge would be the American problem. A U.S. Pope's most difficult task might be speaking prophetically to his own homeland. He would be uniquely positioned to understand and critique the specific spiritual ills of American culture. Radical individualism versus the Catholic understanding of community and the common good. Consumerism and materialism that contradict gospel values of poverty and simplicity. The culture of death, from abortion to gun violence, that he would be compelled to address not as a political issue, but as a fundamental moral one. Summary: what Americans don't get is that the first U.S. Pope wouldn't be a triumphant symbol of American exceptionalism. Instead, he would be a paradoxical figure. An insider who must become an outsider to lead effectively. A leader from the world's sole superpower who must critique its foundational values. An American whose most difficult audience would be his fellow Americans. He wouldn't be America's Pope, he would be the Pope who, by chance, was born in America, and that would make his pontificate one of the most complex and challenging in modern history. American expectation likely Vatican, global reality. A decisive CEO who fixes the Vatican, a pastoral shepherd who must navigate tradition and collegiality. A symbol of national pride, a figure viewed with suspicion due to U.S. foreign policy and culture. An ally for a domestic political side, a transcendent figure who disappoints both U.S. political tribes. A pope from the heartland, a pope with a likely Hispanic, multicultural background. A leader who promotes American values, a prophet who critiques American individualism and consumerism.